Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Chilling Reign, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are continuing with our Evolving Skies post-rotation content. This time it's going to be Glaceon VMAX, and Glaceon is going to be a very annoying Pokemon for a lot of VMAX decks. It shares that same Dauntless Shield ability that we know Zamazenta V has, who has made himself, a pretty handy Pokemon in the format throughout his tenure already, just by being that chunky, annoying wall. And Glaceon is going to try and do a very similar thing here with the VMAX. Having 310 hit points is a big amount of hit points to get through, especially when VMAXs can't touch it. So yeah, very, very dangerous card in general. And we're going to try and improve your damage output with the Inteleon. Quick shooting can help you reach on some of these V Pokemon over a couple turns to really make your math that little bit sweeter. Glaceon also can hit the bench for 30 damage, so you can do some prep knockouts here and there, potentially even threaten some one-prize engines out there as well. So that's going to be the main reason why we have Inteleon as our backup. So let's jump into that list then. 3 copies of the Crystal Veil Glaceon VMAX. I feel like you don't necessarily need 4 because we already have the Shady Dealings, which can tutor out Incense if ever we're in a rush. And we also have the Ice Ascension attack from the Glaceon V as well, which we certainly should remember. For 1 water energy, it just allows you to search your deck immediately for a Glaceon and go ahead and grab it and put it into play. So I feel like 3 copies is fine to get the job done, because typically you're just trying to commit towards 1 or 2 of these throughout the game regardless. Like I said, that Crystal Veil ability is really the selling point and why we're really taking notice of this card, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by the attacks of your opponent's Pokemon VMAX, excluding Glaceon. So Glaceons can attack each other, but yeah, in general, this is a really good ability to just stop everything else from swinging into you. And the Max Icicle attack for Water and 2 colorless does 150 and a 30 damage snipe to one of your opponent's bench. This is, like I said, pretty decent. You're not knocking out any V Pokemon with the 150, but hopefully some prep damage from Max Icicle on the bench and the quick shootings and that sort of thing can put the clock on some of these V Pokemon to actually knock them out, and hopefully only with like 1 or 2 of these attacks. And then, a lot of these V Pokemon are much worse, especially the ones that are trying to simply evolve into VMAXs. They typically don't trade super efficiently into you. They're not meant to be attackers a lot of the time. They're meant to just be launch pads into their own VMAXs respectively. So in that instance, Max Icicle is going to get the job done a good amount of the time. One other attack to note on the Glaceon V, actually, that I've covered up with a big 4 of copies there. The text is discard any stadium in play. And you can see right next to it, we do have 2 copies of Pumpkaboo for the exact same reason. But just going back to that Glaceon V, it's an extra way for us to beat Path, which is pretty important because that can be a huge spanner in the works for this sort of deck. But jumping back to this Pumpkaboo, we're playing 2 copies. It's essentially the new Marshadow of the post-rotation era. When you put it into play, you discard the stadium, which is going to be what you need to do to get rid of Path to the Peak, because that's going to be the easiest way to shut off Crystal Veil. So re-enabling that for ourselves is going to be super important. We play 2 copies and we play Scoop Up Net in the list because there is no real useful stadium card that Glaceon could be playing. Turffield Stadium or Fashion Mall would probably be our best options here. So instead, I think having a nice levelable, searchable Pumpkaboo is going to be preferential here, especially because Scoop Up Net can be handy, just because we play so many quick shooting and shady dealing Inteleons that we can take advantage of those as well. And even in certain prize map situations, if your opponent is trying to get around your Glaceon, you can present them enough prizes to win the game, and then later on in the game, Scoop Up Net, and out of nowhere, they're in a really bad position. So I think overall, the Pumpkaboo and the Inteleon alongside Scoop Up Net is going to be preferable to just playing a high count of stadiums. Now, let's jump into that Inteleon line. We all know that this Inteleon is going to be in a ton of engines. We've seen it a lot already in Ice Rider and in the Rapid Strike Urshifu deck, and we're trying to do the same thing here, really. We do have the option to attack with these Inteleons as well, if need be, but ultimately, they're just a ton of good abilities for us. The quick shooting, pushing things into range, making the most of that Max Icicle bench damage, as well as trying to pile into active Pokemon, the likes of, Galarian, Moltres, that sort of thing. You can really put pressure on those with quick shootings over a couple of turns so you can knock them out during the middle of your turn and then max Icicle into something else, it's a really good deal for you, and it really gives us some flexible damage output. Whereas the Shady Dealings is just piecing together the usual pieces, you know, the buckets, the Melonies, the quick ball for the discard synergy, that sort of thing is what we're after here, really, with the Inteleon. And one sort of, in air quotes, panic Crobat. Just because Dark Asset is nice. We don't want to put too many of these in play, obviously, but this can get us out of some sticky situations, so I like playing it as a one-off option. Onto the trainers, we're going to play one copy of Escape Rope. We don't need many switching outs in this list, so the one rope is that flexible, push something to the back option. If you're going to try and do like quick shooting and max Icicle to finish them off, damage-wise, that can be really handy without having to force a boss's orders. But we have a lot of freedom of retreat anyway with Scoop Up Net and with Snowleaf Badge, because of course it doesn't only remove weakness, which is huge, by the way, for Glaceon, because it has a weakness to metal, so turning off your weakness to Zacian is going to be very important. I still think Zacian is awkward, though, because, of course, you don't always have the Snowleaf Badge early, and just regular Zacian swinging into you, even for the 230 damage from Brave Blade over a few turns, can be awkward. So the Leaf Badges are mandatory just for shutting off weakness, but also that freedom of retreat on your Glaceons themselves is a little added benefit. Means that we don't need to commit many spaces to switch outs, especially because we play the Scoop Up Nets, which can be that switch out if need be, but also have that flexible use of allowing us to get extra quick shootings, extra Shady Dealings, and extra uses of our Pumpkaboo. From there, a couple buckets just to access our water energies, of course nice for synergizing with Melony, and then all of our ball search cards to get our army of Inteleons into play, as well as a couple Glaceons should work pretty nicely here. Onto the supporters, because we can cherry pick, I feel having one Marnie is a decent option in here. We're only playing 2 boss's orders, I think mostly because I want to be Melonying a lot to maintain our 3 energy attack cost, but also because we have bench damage a lot of the time, we can continue to damage things over a couple of turns and not really have a huge requirement for boss here, but a couple copies is always going to be nice for picking off key threats that they're trying to build up on the bench, but of course we can Shady Dealings for these, so not a huge need to play a higher number. For research for Melony to keep things nice and simple, research for those discard synergies, Melony to give us that energy acceleration is going to be a really big deal here. And then for energy, a couple copies of Capture, but still going heavily into the water count because we have that Ice Ascension from the Glaceon V and because we want to have the Melony synergy. So I'm not going crazy on Captures, but a little extra couple copies in here to improve that turn 1 Sobble or whatever else is going to be pretty handy. So I think the 9 energy split with the amount of recursion we have through Melony should be plenty to see us through most games. So the full list is here and in the description below as always. Pause now if need be, but we will be jumping into some tech options. I think Leon is actually a really interesting one. I love playing Leon in Ice Rider, and that's kind of the mentality I'm having here, but obviously Ice Rider does much more impactful damage, but you're trying to hit 3 prize Pokemon. Here we're doing much less damage, but into 2 prizes. But the math actually works out really, really similarly because we're trying to hit that sort of 200 echelon because you have Leon and quick shooting pings. This can be a way for you to knock out a Suicune in 1 hit, a Galarian Moltres in 1 hit, a Zacian with a couple Intel pings in there as well. So this really allows you to churn through your opponent's answer Pokemon, essentially. So playing 1 copy of the Leon could be well served in here. Just to really ramp through one of their 2 prize Pokemon, you know, take a lot of energy off the board and take their answers out of play so that the Glaceon is left untouched. So I could foresee that squirming into the list. Also, with the amount of times we are able to use Melony here, a Hyper Potion, even as a 1 copy, could be super annoying, as Pokemon attacking the Glaceon are less than optimal a lot of the time. Their damage output is usually quite weak because these aren't the main attackers of most decks. So having the 1 copy of the Hyper Potion where you can simply then manually attach and Melony back onto your Glaceon could be a great way of healing. Obviously, we are lacking a lot of healing options at the moment in the format. The option for Cheryl is probably too difficult for you with the high energy attack cost that we have with the Glaceon, so 1 copy potentially of Hyper Potion could work its way in here just to be that extra bit of survivability on one of your Glaceons, which I think is pretty interesting. At the moment, I'm giving you just the straightforward baseline, though, as I always tend to do. A couple other cards you can think about. Suicune V as just being another way to get through V Pokemon. Like I said, sometimes your opponent represents a couple of big threats against you, so having 1 Swift Runner Suicune in here just to be potentially a finishing attacker that does a bit more damage than Max Icicle, or being a way to just deal with one of their 2 prizes and, again, remove those energies from play, that sort of thing, could be a good deal for you here. It's just a good card in general, so making a space for 1 copy won't be too detrimental. And also the option for maybe a 1/1 Frostlass line in here. We are already playing 3 Scoop Up Net, so it makes that card more versatile, makes us less weak to hammer, that sort of thing. And less Melony reliant, which could allow us to play some other tech supporters as well. So it would open up other spaces in the list elsewhere if you do want to play this Frostlass line. It's not a bad card by any means. It could be a great way for you to maintain your energy attachments and not be too worried about being like blown up instantly by a Phoebe play from the opponent or that sort of thing. So yeah, the Frostlass could be a good deal here. Onto the matchup overview. I've put only one, in air quotes, like very bad matchup, which I think will be the Zacian Inteleon style deck. Like I said, we are playing Snowleaf Badges, but I still think you get out-traded just through an army of Brave Blades back to back to back, and that's exactly what the Intel list tries to do. So I think that will be, out the gates, probably your worst main top meta matchup. That said, there's nothing stopping Shadow Rider playing Path of the Peak, Ice Rider playing Path of the Peak. Eternatus has played Phoebe in the past and certainly could do again. Urshifu could easily, as well as Victini as well. They can tech in these answers if they really want to, and, you know, just have the Eldegoss on their side. So although Zacian out the gates is probably the scariest thing for you, there's nothing stopping the meta warping around a card like Glaceon and actually forcing those answers into the deck list. That could certainly be a thing. So certainly bear that in mind. On to the closing thoughts. I do think that Zacian Zamazenta is also going to be a good walling archetype where you have the Rusted Shields on Zamazentas. They then become 2-price, 300 hit point Pokemon. So comparably, you know, Glaceon gets powered up that little bit easier because of Melony. But Zamazenta has Metal Saucer in its own right and has these tools that can really make them chunky. And the Zacian can be a great way to mop up opposing V Pokemon trying to attack through the Zamazenta. And Zamazenta actually has healing with the Crystal Cave Stadium card. So there's potential for the Zacian Zama deck to be a better version of the Glaceon. I do think the Glaceon has a better damage output in general, because the Zacian Zama deck is very, very reliant on hitting energy off of Intrepid Sword and finding your Saucer energy attachments. And maybe could even be playing the coin flip turbo patches as well if need be. So yeah, that is going to be a kind of like less streamlined list. You're just potentially having a slightly better time against opposing Zacian decks because you can be Brave Blading them straight back sort of thing. So that's something to bear in mind. Really, how the meta develops, to be honest, how many people are playing those Path decks, how many people are playing Phoebe in their list, and how many Zacian decks in general are floating around. That's always going to be the live and die of a Glaceon-style archetype. So it's certainly one where you need to keep your finger on the pulse in the format to see how successful this archetype is actually going to be. But I do think there's a lot of boxes being ticked here. It's a very streamlined list. We know the Inteleon engine is a solid one. We have precedent of that in other VMAX decks, and I think in post-rotation it is one of the best you can be playing alongside the likes of Cincino and that sort of stuff as potential alternatives. But in general, we know that this engine works, and the ability is very strong and annoying, and I can foresee it being a challenge for a lot of decks that aren't willing to tech for you. So let me know your thoughts of Glaceon down below. Will it be one of these meta warping cards, or is it just going to be one of those things that you face one in every 20 games and sort of slap your head and then move on to the next game? Let me know your thoughts down below. I will see you in another video tomorrow for another Evolving Skies deck list. So cheers.